wind, sun and hail, men are never female. Rain, wind, sun and hail, men are never female. Next one. 1, 2, 3, notice self-ID. 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 Another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Self-ID is a lie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Self-ID is a lie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Self-ID is a lie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Self-ID is a lie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Self-ID is a lie.
Still 5 minutes.
Seriously?
Yeah.
5 minutes,
Yeah.
5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah. What rights do you think trans people don't have? What rights do you think trans people don't have?
You tell me why trans people should not have any rights.
No, I'm not saying
There are some rights you think they shouldn't have. aren't
No,
there?
the only right they shouldn't have is to have access to spaces designated for the opposite sex.
Yeah, and are you troubled by that? Have you had many?
Yes,
Have
we
you
get
had-
we get contacted by a lot of people who are
But
troubled
aren't
by
they
it.
trying to come to your meetings and stuff?
Yes, we've been shut down by lots of things and had lots of
No,
protests. and
I mean, are there individual trans people who want to come to your meetings? Have you been troubled by people wanting
Well, I
to
got
join?
beaten up by them, so I guess there might be something.
Yeah.
So, how can you actually tell whether a person is trans?
Well, you tell me.
Yeah.
It doesn't make
I
any
can't.
sense.
I
does it?
can't tell.
I know. It's
Exactly.
bullshit.
Yeah,
So
but we
when-
can
so
tell
when
when
you-
someone's a man or someone's a woman. You see, so
You
that
can tell by looking.
yeah, generally,
Wow.
yeah,
You
yeah.
must have, mental eyesight.
No, I have just normal. Like most people can tell. Children can tell. Most people can tell what somebody
I
what
work
sex
with a
somebody is.
person who identifies as a woman, and I'm not sure whether she's a man or a woman, but she looks like a woman.
Okay.
She's got breasts, I haven't seen inside her pants.
Well, that's
But,
right. Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at
Look,
her.
as long as they do their job, that's all I care about.
That's right, yeah, she works
Yeah.
in the health system.
I don't really care about things like that.
Yeah. No, I don't really
So
care
what
either.
do you care about?
I care about my rights. I
Your
care
right
about my rights to
To have a woman-only
space.
space.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are
Absolutely.
your women-only spaces?
Sorry?
What are your women-only spaces?
Okay. Well, the usual ones. I mean, we've got public toilets, we've got changing rooms, we've got lesbian-only spaces,
Right.
we've got dating sites, we've got
And
things
how many
like that.
trans people are wanting to come into your lesbian-only spaces?
So many that we can't run them anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
you're having public events kind of thing.
Well, we used to. We used to have lots of traditionally we had lots of sort of things like dances and those sorts of things that
Yeah.
were lesbian only, women only.
Yeah.
And now if we promote them,
Gosh.
they get shut down because men want to
Who
come.
shuts them down?
Well, we end
venues.
up shutting them down because men
okay.
insist on coming, and so they're not lesbian events.
Right.
So it sort of defeats the purpose of having them. It'd be like you imagine turning up to a speed dating event. And
Not something I've ever done. I
well,
have
no,
to
it's
say.
not something I've ever done either. But so if I was single and I was going to a lesbian speed dating
Are you
event,
filming me, by the way?
yeah, we're live
off?
streaming. I can just I'll put it over there for you. Sorry,
In that case, I'll sing to you.
we'll sing. Oh, no.
And did those feelings do anything
Anyway, you were asking about speed dating. So it would be like going to a lesbian speed dating event. Oh, this is no device. Yes, la la la. Just turn off my ears. Yeah, she's turned her ears off. Maybe she doesn't have any ears. Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. Right, I think we're up to 3 minutes past. Okay, here you go. We've got a lovely little singer over here. So, fortunately, she's not very tall, so I'll just lift it up. Right.
Two minutes to go to our 1 minute silence. We're in 1 minute silence because we're mourning the loss of women's rights. and the attacks on them.
This woman is mourning who knows what. Yeah. Yeah.
Take your mask off and show your face.
Yeah. No debate. I think that pretty much sums up the movement here, doesn't it? Yeah. Don't want to listen, don't want to talk. As soon as the questions get slightly tricky, which isn't really very tricky at all, and it's all over, mask on, ears off, and they start.
And either singing or fists, whichever suits them better.
I think singing is...
Whichever sex they are, actually.
Yeah. Singing is probably preferable to fists, so that was pretty bad singing, to be fair.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was an assault on my ears.
Are you okay? Do you feel safe?
Well, I need counselling, I think.
I think you'll be okay. We'll work through this. We will work through the assault on your ears. Right, I think... How do you film a minute's silence?
Bow your head. Try to leak a couple of tears.
Yeah.
1 minute silence, thanks.
Right, that's enough silence. Let's go and hear some speeches.
When you see some sense, you can come over to the right side where women are.
So go up ahead and turn back. Just going to go ahead and front. So we've got this amazing little park that's just set up for some serious turfing. We found it. It's almost as if the goddess of turfs thought, whereabouts in the most woke, ridiculous, captured city in the world, Wellington, where could we put a refuge for turfs where they can be safe and where they can speak? And look, here it is. Central Wellington. It's called Catherine Mansfield Park. Catherine Mansfield would have been the world's biggest turf if she'd been alive today. Unfortunately, she died of tuberculosis. So, you know.
Hello, how are you? Hi, nice to meet you.
You too.
Guys done your bits and bobs over there?
Yeah, a minute of silence, and then we've got a couple of protesters, women just like us.
Oh, is there protesters over there?
Yeah, they're feminists for trans rights.
Yeah.
They'll call
I
themselves.
moved it. It's on brick still. It's a bit of an option.
Okay. Yep.
Didn't trust that flag. Are the protesters coming over here? Or
Someone invited them to come
Yeah.
over to our side. But there's only two of them, so
So we've organised some speakers here, and we're about to start.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear?
1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
How's that at the back? Is that all good at the back? Can you hear at the back? Try now.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
That That's as good as it goes, right? That's it. Okay.
Hi everyone, are we ready to go?
Yes!
Welcome to the global protest, New Zealand style. The German feminists instigated this protest against sex self-ID because their legislation for sex self-ID came into effect as of today. It's a global protest that's been participated by most of the countries in the Western world anyway. As far as I understand it, it's Australia, the US, Canada, most of Europe and England. Scotland maybe as well. We're doing this, Speak Up for Women are doing this particular version of the global protest. We are particularly committed to doing this protest because we have feminist principles. This was instigated by feminism, and we have a specialty with legislation. We felt that we could bring something to this protest, and we have brought 9 speakers who are going to entertain you and inform you of what's happening in their specific areas of interest. I've gone blank, of course. However, so what we're going to do is we're going to move into the speakers. The first person who will be coming to speak is Suzanne from Speak Up for Women. Suzanne has been in the movement for 5 or 6 years. She is a strong radical feminist. She has a specialty around legislation and political commentary. She also apparently has a good sense of humour. I haven't seen that yet, but I have seen her ability to teach me how to interpret legislation, and that is valuable. Suzanne, please.
Thanks for the intro there, Tanya. So, firstly, it's not 6 years, it's 5 years almost exactly. This time 5 years ago, I was living a kind of lesbian utopia in suburbia, blending in with a house in the burbs with my partner and daughter. And although we weren't married, we were no longer prevented from being married. We had the choice, just like any other couple. In terms of women's rights, I was fairly confident that our daughter would grow up with things at least as fair as I did. I was living in blissful ignorance. Those were my good old days. And we have the feminists of the 60s and 70s to thank, some of whom are here today. No doubt wondering why it's taking so bloody long. It was around this time that I first heard the term self-ID. I heard the term self-ID in relation to a women's conference that had just been cancelled by Massey University in Wellington. It was a Speak Up for Women conference to be held in November 2019, almost exactly 5 years ago. I did a tad of investigating and realised that the women who were being described as bigots, transphobic and anti-gay were nothing of the sort. This information made me pretty determined to attend the conference. So my partner and I went along with a load of other women and some men from Wellington and further afield and enjoyed listening to some really fantastic and empowering speakers. Holly Lawford-Smith, Megan Murphy, Melissa Darby and of course Annie O'Brien. It was eye-opening to say the least, and there was no going back. The first thing that strikes me about the term self-ID is that it's obviously being used by people to describe something about themselves that isn't a reality. Nobody who is actually something ever has to use the term self-ID, they simply are. But then I kept digging and found to my astonishment that the term reality was decidedly old-fashioned and was only used by fascist Nazi bigots. Not only that, thoughts and feelings that centred women's rights on women were to be avoided at all costs. Once I realised that the word woman was being used to describe men, well, that's when I really lost my shit, to be honest. So I entered the world of TERFs. My partner and I spent a memorable, for all the wrong reasons, few weeks making all sorts of terrible discoveries about AGPs, ruined lesbian dating sites, rapid onset gender dysphoria in men and women's sports. A friend who peaked at the same time messaged me and she said, "Whatever you do, don't Google the cotton ceiling." and here I am. So, what is the legal situation with self-ID? The thing that the German self-ID legislation and the New Zealand legislation both do is confirm that it's all pretend. Our birth certificates are now vanity documents. In Germany, the legislation has exclusions for sport, other areas, and doesn't seem to count when it comes to military conscription during wartime. How convenient. In New Zealand, our birth certificate may or may not be used to determine a person's sex. We can determine a person's sex in other ways. Dangerously, we're still permitted to use our eyes and our ears. This important addition was implemented thanks to Speak Up for Women and other feminists who pointed out the insanity of the law change on other legislation and, most importantly, on the rights of women. In both countries, from a trans activist point of view, the law gives with one hand and takes with the other. For the general public not familiar with the ins and outs of the laws, it creates confusion, an impression that self-ID actually means someone has changed sex. But one thing is clear, the lawmakers do not really believe that trans women are women. In Germany, this makes it all the more ridiculous that there is scope for punishing someone who uses the name and sex of someone who has gone through the legal process of changing their birth certificate. Now, this might come as a shock to many of you, but in New Zealand, there is no legislation that prevents a service provider from providing single-sex spaces. Our birth, deaths and marriages, or self-ID legislation, has the out clause that I mentioned earlier, and our Human Rights Act outlines specific situations where it is still not unlawful to discriminate on the basis of sex. These situations include sports, accommodation, changing rooms and bathrooms, and counselling of a personal nature, and other areas. Our Human Rights Act does not mention gender or gender identity once. It is all about sex. So, with the law on our side, why is it so hard to maintain women-only spaces, services and sports? Well, nearly 20 years ago, Georgina Beyer, our first transgender MP, proposed a bill to include gender identity in the Human Rights Act. It was in a limited form and proposed adding gender or gender identity to the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination, also referred to as protected characteristics. It didn't propose amending the exceptions, the parts of the Act that give us women protection based on our sex. Now, rather than going through the normal bill process in Parliament, the draft was sent to Crown Law, the government lawyers, for an opinion, to see if the change was actually necessary. The short answer is that Crown Law said that in their opinion, changes were not necessary because gender was included under sex. The logic and context to this conclusion is best described using an example. Let's say a man applies for a job. The job is not a sex-specific job. So let's say it's a bus driver. The male applicant dresses in a way that could be described as like a woman, but to be honest, probably not the way I'm dressed today, but you know, like a gender-conforming woman. The male applicant doesn't get the job, and the reason given is that it's to do with the way he presents. Crown Law says that he should be able to claim that he is being discriminated against on the basis of his sex because he's not conforming to sex stereotypes. An attire that is perfectly acceptable on a woman is not considered acceptable on him, and a potential employer is unlawfully discriminating. Now, we actually think this is fair. That's how the law should work. This isn't about whether he wants to be legally recognised as a woman. It's about sex stereotypes and whether our appearance matches the perceived standard for our sex. And that is what the Crown Law opinion was about. That was in 2006. Much has changed since then, but men still can't be women. But in more recent years, the Human Rights Commission has picked up this opinion, and that is all it is, an opinion, and run with it. They have made it their own. They have altered the context and have told government agencies, councils, employers, service providers, and pretty much anyone who'll listen, that it is unlawful to discriminate against transgender women in women's spaces. Our previous Human Rights Commissioner believed that men could be lesbians. We have high hopes for the incoming Commissioner and hope to meet with him soon. After some questioning from Speak Up for Women, the Human Rights Commission public guidance has changed. They now note, alongside their women-hating advice, that the law has not actually been tested in court, but unfortunately the damage has been done. Organisations that should be able to rely on the Human Rights Commission for good advice have been misinformed, and the women have been losers, and that's putting it mildly. The Human Rights Commission and the organisations that listen to them have done a wonderful job of destroying the social contracts that keep women safe. Our society runs on social contracts, and although it doesn't always feel like it, in New Zealand we still do live in a liberal democracy. We don't have millions of tiny laws that govern our every move. For the most part, we're left to our own devices to use common sense and social norms to decide how to behave and how to decide what sort of behaviour as a group is acceptable from other people. We know that it's not okay to throw a stick for a stranger's dog at the dog park, don't we? Yeah. And we definitely know that it's not okay for a man to be in a space where women and girls are vulnerable. But this contract is broken. We can no longer expect to be supported when we invoke it. And in the past, we didn't even have to invoke it. But thanks to trans rights activists and the Human Rights Commission, the social contract hasn't just been broken or even ripped up. It's been shredded into 1,000 pieces, dropped in a puddle and urinated on. Remember, they only want to pee. So it's up to us, the women and men who know that it's wrong and who have common sense and good memories. We've squirreled away our own copies of that contract, and it's up to us to wave it around, shove it in people's faces and say, remember this? Yeah. And trans women are men. Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. We're in a park here today. We're just in a little courtyard, and there's a playground, a kids' playground just next door here. We've had a few curious little faces poking through the fence, which has been really cute. We're fighting for the rights of women, but we're also, by doing that, fighting for the rights of children. Children to be freed from that idiocy of being born in the wrong body bullshit. Excuse me, kids. I swore. We need to fight for the rights of women because the women are the mothers and the mothers need to protect the kids. Yeah. If you take away that protection from the children, we are bringing up a generation of mental illness at its innermost depth. Yeah. You take away a child's sense of self, a sense of identity, you are destroying that child's life, for life. So listen up, girls. We're fighting for you. Yes. The next speakers are Lesbian Resistance. Sabina and Marie will be coming up as a duo, I understand. They will be talking to you about their experiences. Both these women have spent their adult lives fighting for lesbian rights, for women's rights. They do amazing work, diligently, without fail, on their own time, at their own pace. They're very welcome to speak today.
Hi. Hi. I'm Sabina. I've worked in this building for 7 long years. And in that time, I have seen 3 ambassadors come and go, and none of them were in any doubt who was a man and who was a woman. It is wild how much has changed since I quit my job in 2021. The current German ambassador, Her Excellency Frau Nicole Menzenbach, no longer recognizes the difference between men and women, or the difference between sex and gender. And it seems she also can't tell the difference between identity and mental illness. She states that pretending to be something you're not is a basic human right. The journalist Jennifer Bilek appropriately calls this pretense, sex deception, which might be a lot of things, but a human right, it is not. I have no idea how it is now in there, but while I worked at the German embassy, no one even mentioned things like self-ID, and our email signatures did not dictate anyone's pronouns, that's for sure. If I'd been asked to call a man Frau so and so, I would have refused, even if it meant risking my job. In fact, part of why I left, teeny tiny part, it was because I had a smidgen of an inkling of where things were headed. But I admit, even in my most cynical outlook, I never saw sex self-ID coming. I did not. Forcing people by law to take part in someone's delusion is so absurd, so grotesque, that only enlightened novelists like George Orwell and Aldous Huxley could make it up. Letting people legally lie about something as basic as their sex is creating a dystopian society that has absolutely no chance of happiness or good fortune. Being forced by law to tell lies is not progress, that's oppression and even tyranny. One of the most disturbing results of sex self-ID laws is what they mean for homosexuality. Lesbianism, by definition, is an exclusively female world. When a man can simply declare himself female and by law be part of my lesbian spaces, it doesn't just disrupt things, it erases the very definition what it means to be a lesbian. In short, it is deeply homophobic. Laws that force us to lie need to go. They need to be repealed, and they can be repealed, and they will be repealed. That is our fight here in New Zealand, and I know Germany is working on it too. In fact, we're actively involved with Les Reloaded in Berlin.
They're watching.
So greetings from down under, and we stand in solidarity with all our German sisters united in this fight. Thank you.
Good day everyone, my name's Marie Doherty, and I'm, as you know, from Lesbian Resistance. I just wanted to put a little bit of a personal touch to a lot of this. My first encounter with men presenting as women was way back in the late 1960s, and I'd just gone to the Big Smoke to work. My best friend and I, we'd gone out on the town to look for some nightlife. Where we came from, there was no nightlife, so it was a big adventure. And we ended up in a little bar called, well, it was a club probably, because they had 10 o'clock closing then, I think, for the pubs. But it was a little bar called the Bo Peep. And we sat there, we were greenies, and paid an arm and leg for a drink. And then all of a sudden a door flew open out of the side of this room. And there were two huge men in there fighting. They had frocks on and wigs. One pulled the wig off another one, and there was a bald guy, and we just were horrified, to make an understatement. But I was really more hacked off that I couldn't go to the toilet, because they were in the women's toilets. So what then seemed like a harmless night out in an adult venue is now turned into a nightmare where we're fighting for our reality and truth. My new job in the Big Smoke was I served 5 years in the New Zealand Navy. And if I'd confessed to being a lesbian during that time, I would have been given an instant dishonourable discharge. Today, men can declare themselves women. They can put on a frock because they won't wear trousers. They can go with impunity into the women's barracks, they can go into the changing rooms, the shower block, the toilets, the sleeping quarters. And that's by law. I wouldn't have joined the Navy, that's for sure nowadays. If the men outrank the woman, they have even more power. In all my long years as living as a lesbian, I've never felt so vulnerable, and it's so dangerous to being a lesbian. And that's in the days, comparing to the days when we used to run from the pubs, men chasing us, trying to get out of being beaten up, that kind of atmosphere. Now is more dangerous, because now they'll lock me up for what I have to say. The sex self-ID law in New Zealand and in other Western countries is called, they just call it ID, the ID law, self-ID, ID. It's given men permission to force themselves into my private lesbian spaces. I call this a rape on my culture. And I'm disgusted and repulsed by men who would call themselves lesbian. It's homophobic and it's woman hating. Shame on the politicians who pass these laws and the government officials who allow these men into all the jobs in the public service. They allow mentally ill men with fetishes to take away the rights that women, lesbians, that we fought for and to protect girls. As lesbian resistance, we stand in Market Square regularly, every Friday, in a small rural town, and we talk to the public. We take placards, we let them come up to us, and we talk about issues like sex self-ID. And all these years I wondered, what did heterosexual women feel and think about the years of all these men who dressed up as women, the drag queens, the transvestites? What do they feel? I mean, I know I didn't like it, but I never really knew what they felt. The drag queens who dressed up as a mockery of women, the caricature of what women are. And I found out from talking a lot lately, they don't like it at all. They're just like me. In fact, overwhelmingly the men and the women do not like sex self-ID at all. A bill that was snuck in on the back of another bill and forced people to go along with something they never even approved of. The days of being kind and generous, they're long over. You give an inch to a mentally ill man and they take a mile. Forcing something so unnatural on women and girls is not only insulting, it's very, very dangerous, especially for girls and children. Well, aren't we lucky here in New Zealand? The lefties haven't pushed through these hate bills, the bills that they want to push through to suppress us from having a debate, telling the truth, like women like me want to tell. And that is that you can't change your sex. Sex is not an identity. Men cannot be women, women cannot be men. And there's no such thing as a trans child. It's just pure child abuse, what they're doing. So a big hello to the German sisters. We stand firmly here beside you, lesbian resistance, and I'm sure everybody here. And good luck in your fight. These bills have to be repealed, especially this one. And keep fighting and keep resisting.
Tanya, I'm just going to do a little spin.
So just on that note, the speakers here today are heavily weighted in the fact that there are a lot of lesbians in the group. That's unapologetic, I don't care. I just noted that every time Suzanne and I do an event and the word lesbian is mentioned, or, well, lesbians are there, or whatever, there's always someone who sends us an email saying, ooh, don't include me, ooh, lesbians, I don't like lesbians. I thought long and hard about, well, no, I didn't. I thought a little bit about the speakers that we've invited here today, and whether it will be just too many lesbians for some of the straight homophobes. And all I could think in the end was, tough shit. Tough shit.
No, you can't have too many lesbians.
No. Some of us are just sort of single and hoping for someone to hit on later. But basically, the reason why it's so weighted in support of lesbians is because lesbian feminists have been at the forefront of this movement. They were at the forefront at the beginning. They brought it into the general populace. They're here in the middle, and I'm assuming it's the middle now. And we will be there at the end because we get shit done. Our next speaker is Annie O'Brien. Annie was a previous spokeswoman for Speak Up for Women. She's been a senior staffer, parliamentary staffer, and she currently works for the Free Speech Union. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Annie. Take the mic.
Yeah, maybe pop that up a bit. That'll do, I think. Yeah. I'm one of the aforementioned lesbians as well, so just now I see why I was invited. I'm Annie O'Brien, and thanks for the introduction. I sometimes get asked to describe what I do in this movement, and I think the best kind of thing to say is I'm just a professional troublemaker. I can't really pin it down to anything else, but this speech should be very short. In fact, the entire matter of sex self-ID should have been raised and concluded in minutes, and everyone should have gone to the pub. It should have been ground to an uneventful halt at the sound of the word no. Oprah famously said no is a complete sentence, and it's a pity that she doesn't apply that to all facets, but it's right. Oprah is far from alone in her hypocrisy. Believe Women, #MeToo, lulled us into a false sense of confidence that change was coming, consent was being taken more seriously, and that when we said no, we might be listened to. Celebrity after celebrity gave speeches, wore t-shirts, and marched. Those same celebrities, much of them women, have taken part in the witch hunt of those of us who said no to gender ideology. This is a matter of consent. While consent for sexual contact is the most fundamental kind of consent, women have spent history having our autonomy trampled on and voices ignored. We have consented to very little throughout the history of humankind. So while it came as a shock when our no's to gender ID were ignored, it really shouldn't have. I came to this movement more than 10 years ago via the travesty of men being allowed to identify into women's prisons, and I was incredulous. What about their safety? Do they consent to this, the women? Why are prison systems pandering to the fetishes of murderers and rapists? My first cancellation came because I tweeted that a man calling himself Cynthia China Blast should be in a men's prison. He was incarcerated, by the way, for raping and murdering a 12-year-old girl. The trans activists attempted a struggle session. They attacked, they condemned, they made me persona non grata, all because I said a monster should be in a male prison. It was then that I realised that nothing would trump the sexual demands of men claiming to be women. No matter how much we said no, we would not be listened to. We said no to sex self-ID in New Zealand. I think the statistics there show that 73% said no. We tried to get politicians to see our perspectives, but even the ones who agreed with us were too frightened of trans activists to speak up. Our cowardly parliament unanimously voted to ignore our objections and bring in sex self-ID. We did not consent.
We do not consent to men using our bathrooms and changing rooms. We do not consent to them being able to watch us changing, and we do not consent to having to see their proud erections while they claim to just want to pee. We do not consent to men being housed in women's prisons. We don't consent to the rapes that happen when they're allowed in. We don't consent to men in our domestic violence shelters, hospital rooms, and any other spaces where we are vulnerable and entitled to single-sex provisions. We don't consent to men participating in female sport. We don't consent to them stealing medals, prize money, and opportunities. We don't consent to men declaring they are lesbians and invading our bars, groups, and social spaces. We don't consent to any of the intrusions into our spaces and the destruction of our boundaries. But there's also the more intangible things we don't consent to. These can be just as important. We do not consent to being treated as a subset of our sex. We do not consent to the language we use to describe ourselves and our experiences being co-opted and rendered meaningless. We do not consent to having been called people with eggs, which was a recent one, or uterus havers. We do not consent to sexualised and insulting parodies of what men think it is to be a woman. We do not consent to conversations about our sex being constantly railroaded into conversations about the desires of men to be women. We do not consent. We have said no more times than can be counted. We will say it 1 trillion times more. We do not consent. For quite some time, I allowed my female socialisation to dictate how I responded to these encroachments on our rights. I was polite, I was kind, nice, compliant, apologetic, and far, far too compromising. I thought if we played nice and asked in gentle tones, we would be listened to. After all, we were told men who identify as women are the most vulnerable people in the world. We needed to be gentle. But it became clear that no matter how much I grovelled, the media would twist my words, characterise me as an extremist, and paint us all in a bad light. Politicians might sit down with me if I was polite, but getting an audience is only part of it. My kindness might persuade them, but they would not dare awaken the beast that is trans activists. The TRA scream, throw things, assault people, and have a record of successfully cancelling many women. They threaten rape, they threaten death. They're vulgar and violent. Part of the reason I left Wellington is because I had a stalker who was a 6'5" trans woman who followed me to a remote beach. And I genuinely thought that was it for me, and my body would wash up for my poor partner to identify. It got me thinking. Kindness is demanded of us, but not expected of trans activists. Their violence is excused, and our honest words are condemned. It's almost like we are treated like women, while they have their violence excused like men. Now, I would never suggest that we should behave like them. It's appalling, and they should be ashamed. But we have to drop the shackles of kindness. When they tell us to be kind, they are demanding we comply. It begins with pronouns, and before we know it, the cuckoo birds have taken over the nest. I've come to realise in my 30s that one of the personality traits I value the most about myself is my disagreeableness. I've been told it's a bad trait, and that it makes me rude or mean or unwieldy. But being disagreeable means I question everything. I refuse to comply, and I remain stubbornly staunch about my principles. I want to leave you with this message. Do not be kind, be disagreeable.
Yeah.
Say no, and don't preface it with an apology. Assert our rights and needs with confidence and the unapologeticness of a man demanding we indulge his fetish. Because they don't need to silence us if we silence ourselves. Do not be afraid to call a man a man. Do not be afraid to say you don't play the pronoun game. Don't be afraid to say, there is a man in the women's changing rooms and I do not consent to him watching me change. No is a complete sentence. Finally, I just want to talk about who the enemy is in this fight against sex self-ID. Sure, the TRAs are naturally our opposition, but honestly, they're best ignored. They are mostly severely mentally unwell people with a poor grasp of reality. The true enemy are cultural elites. It's the media who write gushing propaganda advocating for transactivism and demonise us. It is the public servants who write the sex self-ID policies, wear rainbow lanyards, and who kicked me, an actual lesbian, out of the work rainbow group for being a TERF. It is the HR departments in corporations that renovate women's bathrooms to be unisex, gender neutral. It's the teachers who tell our kids that they can change sex and hide social transition from their parents. It's academia who have redefined womanhood and embedded postmodernism in everything. Sadly, if you look at all of those groups, the people who populate them are demographically similar. Our major strategic enemy are upper middle class, university educated, left wing, mostly white women. And I've just described myself, so. Just like the suffragettes had women opposing the vote, and some women would still say today that a husband cannot rape his wife because he's entitled to her body. It is the privileged women who stand against those of us asserting our rights. These women will likely never be in prison. They won't need a domestic violence shelter or really use public facilities. They don't need to rely on scholarships. They do not see what they are giving away on behalf of us all. But they have no right to consent on our behalf. They are privileged classes of women who shill for the sexual demands of men. Pathetic, clueless, and fucking dangerous. We must assert our right to consent, or not. We must stop falling for the kindness trap. We have to take the fight to the true enemy who write the policies and have the power to enact them. And we can only do that if we are unapologetically disagreeable.
Thank you, Annie. I think there's something in finding our pride, and our pride in being TERFs, our pride in being bitches, our pride in being very disagreeable, as Annie says. They took the pride flag from us, but we can get it back again, and we can make it all about being a bitch. Okay, the next speaker will be Hilary Oxley. Hilary has been a lesbian feminist and a fighter for women's rights and lesbian rights for all her life also. And she is a member of LAVA. Thank you, Hilary.
Yeah, so I'm Hilary and I'm from LAVA, Lesbian Action for Visibility in Aotearoa. We have a case to settle with the Human Rights Review Tribunal because out in the city barred us from having a display at the Pride Fair in 2021. To learn more about that you can look at lava.nz and we can hand out some stuff about our case too. 445 men have changed their sex marker on their birth certificate in the past year in New Zealand. They haven't, of course, changed sex because you can't do that. And I will be referring to sex as something we are, a biological state, and using the word gender to refer to how we are, a sex stereotype. I want to start with passing as the opposite sex. Unlike most men who want to pass as women, there are a lot of reasons, unrelated to voyeurism, for women to want to pass as men. Women have passed as men through the ages to get the higher male wage, to support themselves and others, to be listened to and taken seriously, to do science, to write books, to climb trees, to avoid male violence, to live in same-sex relationships. Nowadays, we can do some of these things without passing as men. We don't need to be either closet or pass as men so as to live in same-sex relationships in New Zealand. Though there are many young women who are wondering if they are lesbian, who, because of fashion, illogical thoughts, and a bit of a cult, are being channeled into a trans identity rather than being out as lesbians and proud to be women. But some of the old reasons for passing are still more easily achieved if we pass as men. For example, being listened to and taken seriously. This is one of the dramatic benefits reported by women who are passing as men after taking testosterone. They remark on having their opinions sought after now that they are mistaken for men. It's a new and extremely profound experience for these women. And for them and for all of us, it clearly exposes the misogyny that we live with as a general rule. There have always been plenty of lesbians and other women who have survived happily and healthily while wishing they had been born male because of the privileges that would have given them. Perversely, having your opinion asked after, being listened to and taken seriously on a day-to-day basis are not the male privileges that are lacking for the men who identify themselves as women. These men, who think they're women or insist they're lesbians, are taken so seriously in rainbow circles that their point of view decides what happens to the actual lesbians, who don't include men in their safely supportive lesbian-only groups. Unlike bisexual and heterosexual women, lesbians have zero interest in engaging with men's sexual urges, whether these urges be considered kinks or natural urges. We certainly don't want to be satisfying them by including them in lesbian-only or women's-only spaces, or by simply referring to these privileged humans as she. Germany's new law proposes that anyone, like any of us, who continues to refer to a man who claims to have a female gender identity as a man can be fined up to €10,000. And I believe that's something like $20,000 or something. So there could be a lot of lesbians who refuse to pay and spend a bit of time in prison together in Germany. We lesbians who assert that a man is a he will not permit men into women's or lesbian-only spaces, even though we may mix with men in many other of life's spaces, such as mixing together at the inclusive Pride fairs. For example, in 2019, Lesbian Rights Alliance Aotearoa had their booking for a space at the Pride Fair cancelled because, like Lava, those lesbians knew that lesbians are exclusively same-sex attracted women. So they consulted with the Human Rights Commission, but were told by the staff there that anyone can be a lesbian. This was 2019, when many of us realised that rainbow advisory groups in the government departments weren't actually representing lesbians or gays. They were following the Human Rights Commission by saying that homosexuality is same gender, not same sex attraction. Plus, the Human Rights Commission has redefined the word woman, as has other government departments, including the Ministry for Women. So in 2021, Lava protested outside the Ministry for Women against their definition of woman, which is anyone. Our placard said, sex can't be changed, don't trans the gay away, protect gender non-conformity and our youth, don't skew data, biology is a fact, female is not a feeling, protect women's rights, spaces, safety and statistics. However, 4 days later, these messages were used by Wellington Pride as justification for barring Lava's display from the fair. That was a display with lesbian history on it, local lesbian history on it. So much for free speech. Pride claimed that Lava was trans exclusionary. They reckon that the fair participants should be standing side by side with the most marginalised of the marginalised, including our transgender whānau. Are they, our transgender whānau, the most marginalised of the marginalised? I reckon they are marginalised. But who else is being marginalised by the very group that opposes marginalisation? Discriminating against lesbians by banning us for asserting we are exclusively same-sex attracted is marginalising us and ostracising us from our own similarly marginalised and repressed people. Nowadays, trans-identified people are supported by extremely mainstream businesses. For one bit of a shocking example, since 2016, Barclays Bank has been one of the loudest corporate supporters of Mermaids, the organisation where younger trans-identified people are pushed through medical transition. Barclays Bank is not marginal by any stretch of the imagination. For more information on this, Barclays and Co. Google Barclays Bank, Jeffrey Epstein, Prince Andrew in 2015. It's shocking. That was when that same bank decided to withdraw funding from Mumsnet, which is a sex realist women's group. Even in past decades in Wellington, the males who identify as trans have continually had supportive socialising and income earning connections with legitimate businesses. They have had safe places to meet. Unlike women who are wondering, and lesbians, for who it's now difficult to find specifically lesbian groups for support, emotional safety and for socialising. We and the use of the word lesbian are being ostracised and marginalised by the LGBTQ decision makers who won't allow lesbian-only groups. Pride also said we should be standing side by side. This is of course exactly what we have done together over the past 35 years at the lesbian and gay fairs, as they used to be called. We have been publicly side by side as broadly inclusive, diverse examples of the rainbow communities, feeling relatively safe, even while not agreeing with each other entirely. Now they are discriminating against, banning and excluding staunch lesbians from a mixed, supposedly inclusive group. So who is it that's not standing side by side? In my opinion, the non-binary girls, trans-identified women and liberal women who are involved in LGBTQ plus circles, who are influenced by the dominating males, as is usual in straight cultures, and who want to welcome males into womanhood, should stop fearing and dissing staunch lesbians, stop fearing and dissing women who speak up for women, stop fearing and dissing people who differentiate between females and males when it matters. Remember, we are not the ones who commonly rate us, both men and women. We are not the ones sharing our images around to more males to satisfy themselves by abusing us women. We are not the ones endorsing a fetish via voyeurism when intruding on our lesbian spaces, whether those spaces be in person, online or in their own minds. So, after Lava was barred from the fair by Wellington Pride, in an effort to inspire newer lesbians, we displayed our band map of local lesbian history outside the fair that we had been barred from. A noisy counter-protest formed and surrounded us, chanting, "Pack your shit and go," right close to our faces, which felt unsafe and they displayed signs bearing slogans such as "fuck turf cunt." It felt unsafe, it was really noisy, stressful, and it was a very sad day. If we say we sometimes want safe lesbian-only groups for coming out and connecting, like is normal for groups that have issues in common, this has been interpreted as us saying that trans-identified men specifically are unsafe. Yet Pride said Lava's presence at the mixed fair would make trans people feel unsafe. Who knows whether they were referring to physical safety or emotional safety. But physical safety is an issue. We do know that trans-identifying males are overrepresented in New Zealand prisons. In New Zealand, about 14% of trans-identifying males from around New Zealand are housed in a female corrections facility. Similarly, about 14% of sentence offenders who are trans-identifying males are on remand or sentenced for sexual assault. That's imprisonment at twice the ratio of men generally. The data clearly shows that males, however they identify, sexually offend at rates much more than female rates. But for trans-identified males, it's more like 28 times more than women. So men identifying as trans does not change their male tendency for sexual assault and other violent behaviour. These are the particular men that women are being told that we should be comfortable sharing our spaces with. So since we were barred from the fair, we made a complaint to the Human Rights Commission about discrimination. This has led on to a complaint with the Human Rights Review Tribunal, where human rights are reviewed, and we are currently preparing for the hearing early next year. So, please support our case and look at lava.nz. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Just before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to just talk a little bit about a personal anecdote, really. A few years ago, I got this tattoo on my arm, which is basically the woman's symbol with a naked woman in the middle. That's how I like my woman. Just so you know, for those who I'm going to hit on later. So I got this tattoo, and I went to a male tattooist for it. And he had a look at it, and he said, "Well, what's this then?" And I said, "Well, it's a female symbol." And I said it reflects feminism. Looking back, I should have said something different. I should have said it reminds me of my grandmother or something, because he started tattooing me. Needle was in my arm, blood was going down my arm, and he turned to me and he said, "So, what did your ex do to make you hate men so much?" And it was at that point I realised that he was going to stuff up my tattoo deliberately. And he did. I tried to talk my way out of it, but he didn't hear me. It is a rubbish tattoo. There was ink all through my flesh. I was bruised from the shoulder to the elbow. And I've done nothing about it. I've never fixed it up or anything like that. And the reason for that is because it reminds me of the misogyny that is inherent in society, and that is what I'm fighting against. That he was prepared to ruin his professional reputation as a tattooist, as a professional tattooist, just to have a go at me for being a feminist. So I wear that with pride too and all. The next speaker is Jenny Ruth, who has kindly come here today to talk about her experiences over the last 50 years. She's been involved in Women's Refuge back in the 70s when it was being created, when it was being, all the women's power was being put into it. And she is now a business analyst and commentator. Jen.
Hi,
trans rights are human rights. And I do mean that. I know what it's like to be denied basic rights. I don't wish that experience on anybody. But no trans-identified man can ever be a woman, no matter how many laws are written trying to force us to pretend to accept that they can be. It is basic biology that in humans, sex is binary and it's immutable. We all know this. There is actually no difference between the word sex and the word gender. The trans ideologists would have you believe that there is a difference, but they are interchangeable and they mean the same thing. Sex is not just what's between our legs. It's in every cell of our bodies. Scientists can tell which sex we are from a simple mouth swab. Archaeologists can tell female bones from male bones. Nobody is assigned sex at birth. Our sex is determined at conception, and these days is usually discovered long before birth. Again, we all know this is part of the human condition. No man can become a woman. The best he can achieve is to ape the appearance of a woman. We all know this. By the way, I regard the term cis, as in cisgender and cis woman, as hate speech. It is an attempt to categorise women as a subcategory of women. Real women stand in no need of such a qualifier. We are the only kind of women. Trans women are actually men. Self-ID laws, like the law in Germany that has just come into force, and like our own that came into force in 2023, do not even require somebody wishing to change their legal gender to make even an attempt to look like members of that gender. A man can simply declare he is a woman, sign the form, and the law will deem him indeed to be a woman. This is what our Department of Internal Affairs says on its website. Quote, "A self-identification process for amending the sex on a birth certificate is a simple administrative process that requires a statutory declaration. It is based on how a person identifies, rather than eligibility criteria such as medical treatment," unquote. I'd add biology isn't required either. The politicians and lawmakers writing these laws and the judges enforcing them have forgotten, or pretend to have forgotten, why women and girls need sex-based rights in the first place. It's a question of basic safety. My generation of feminists achieved quite a lot in terms of women's demands for equality. And these days, in most situations, it mostly doesn't matter what sex you are. But when it does matter, it matters a great deal. Why is safety a particular concern of women and girls? The statistics tell the story. Men are overwhelmingly responsible for most violence. Men are responsible for almost all rapes. Predators are overwhelmingly men. Almost every woman and girl in the world has experienced sexual harassment. I do suspect the ones who say they haven't are telling fibs. I'm not claiming all men are violent or that all men are rapists. The trouble is, we cannot tell whether they are or not just by looking at them. Every woman understands the fear of a man following them on a dark street at night. We fear them because they're men, and we have no way of knowing whether they're one of the dangerous men or not. Women-only spaces matter in changing rooms at gyms and swimming baths. It matters to lesbians wanting to hold women-only gatherings. It matters in women's prisons. It matters in women's refuges. And I was a member of the group in Auckland in the 1970s that set up the first feminist refuge in New Zealand. It matters in rape crisis centres. It matters in women's sports. Germany's self-ID law and New Zealand's self-ID law, and such laws around the world, are putting the safety of women and girls at risk. Imagine, if you can, that you're a convicted rapist and you know you're going to prison. It's obvious that there's a huge incentive to declare that you're a woman so you can be sent to a women's prison. Some people will deny this will happen. The women across the road from us denied it. They said it was a lie. But we know it's already happening. Hillary just gave you the statistics. And it is precisely such predatory men who will take advantage of self-ID laws. It was a rapist in Scotland who changed his name to Isla Bryson and demanded to be housed in a women's prison that helped bring Nicola Sturgeon's reign as First Minister to an end. How many rapists in women's prison will society tolerate? I say just one is one too many. It's time to call BS on such laws. It's time to say no. The safety of women and girls matters, and our rights must be paramount.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for everything. We had another speaker, Jessica, who is a midwife. She's currently birthing a baby at the moment, not her own, and she's a little bit busy. So Janet said that she would step in and take her place instead of going a little bit later. After Janet, I will read Jessica's speech for her. I'll try to bring her same energy to it. She's got some energy, that girl. But Janet here is coming to talk from a WDI perspective, and also I think you have a message from the German woman, is that correct? Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, is that about right? Kia ora everybody, I'm Janet. I'm the New Zealand Country Contact for the Women's Declaration International. The Women's Declaration, which has been signed by about 38,000 women, reaffirms the sex-based rights of women and girls, which are guaranteed by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was known as CEDAW. We oppose all forms of discrimination against women and girls that result from replacing sex with gender identity in law, policy and social practice. We are very concerned that Germany's Self-ID Act, the Gender Self-Determination Act, SPGG, is violating the human rights of women and girls, which are laid out in international law, in particular CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention Against Violence Against Women, which Germany has signed up to, both of those. CEDAW opposes discrimination based on sex. The rights of women in CEDAW are sex-based. These rights are being undermined by concepts of gender coming into law, such as in sex self-ID legislation. Today in Germany, an extreme piece of sex self-ID legislation constituting a very serious attack on women's rights comes into force. This is a setback for women in Germany and across the world. It reflects similar attacks on women's rights around the world, including in Australia and New Zealand. Recently, New South Wales became the last state in Australia to introduce sex self-ID. Some states in Australia have draconian laws equaling the severity of the German law, making it impossible for women to gather in same-sex spaces or to tell the truth about biological sex. The German law is potentially worse than New Zealand's sex self-ID law, the Births, Deaths, Marriages and Relationships Registration Act of 2021, which at least recognises that the birth certificate can no longer be relied upon as evidence of someone's sex. The German law is so extreme that parents can put whatever gender they like on the birth certificate for a child from birth to 5 years age. I can't begin to imagine the psychological harm that this could cause. A person can be fined €10,000 for disclosing what somebody's biological sex is. So if a person's sex or original name cannot be disclosed, that means that criminals and sex offenders will be able to disguise their identities, putting women and children at risk, and women will be silenced from speaking out against sex-based violence. So as I said, Germany has ratified CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention for protection of women from sex-based violence. And Germany also has protections for women in its constitution. And this new law risks violating all of those conventions and protections. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem Al-Salem, sent a 17-page letter to the government of the Federal Republic of Germany, addressed to the Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, in which she described her great concerns about human rights threat to women and girls posed by the SelfID Act, and she demanded statements as to how Germany would continue to guarantee the rights and safety of women and girls. Reem Al-Salem also reminded the German federal government of its obligations under these international rights law to protect children, girls and women based on sex. In particular, Reem Al-Salem noticed the following rights and the following threats to these rights. 1, the right to be free from discrimination and violence. 2, increased risks of violence against women and the associated trauma that comes with that. 3, undermining single-sex spaces for females. 4, lack of trauma-informed approach for women and girls who are victims or survivors of violence. Number 5, the obligation to collect sex-based data in statistics. 6, the negative impact on women and girls' higher standards of mental and physical health. She particularly noted the risks of puberty blockers for children, as outlined in the CAS report. 7, the lack of safeguards for the best interests of the child, which are outlined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly concerning girls. 8, the risks of freedom of expression, religious freedom, and the risk to prevention of violence due to the ban on disclosure. Because if we can't say what someone's real sex is, then we can't protect women against violence from men when we can't admit that they are men. Reem Al-Salem concludes by expressing her great concern about the negative consequences that the new law would have on the rights of women and girls. She reminded the federal government that as a state party to CEDAW, it will be held accountable if it does not take all appropriate measures to prevent, investigate, prosecute, punish and provide redress for acts or omissions by state and non-state actors that lead to gender-based violence against women. Violence against women is recognised as discrimination against women, so allowing it to happen is actually contributing to discrimination against violence. She noted particularly the risks of violence towards women prisoners who are forced to share cells with male inmates. And also, violence against women is inherent in prostitution, which has been legal in Germany for 20 years. The Special Rapporteur asked the German government to explain what steps it would take to address these concerns. She received a very short, meaningless reply which evaded all of the questions. And I note that the German ambassador has tried to reply a little bit more, even though none of her responses are any good to the letter that Speak Up for Women sent her. But at least she did seem to put a bit more detail in than what the German government gave to Reem Al-Salem. Anyway, Reem noticed also, Reem Al-Salem, that the word Geschlecht in the German Self-Determination Act is understood to refer to both sex and gender, as German law does not make a distinction between them and uses the same word to denote both. She says this prevents a sensitive approach to issues pertaining both to sex and to gender. Under United Nations law, until recently, has always recognised that sex is about biological sex, whereas gender is about the social constructs and expectations which reinforce a hierarchy of men over women. CEDAW calls for the elimination of these sex-based stereotypes. We have seen the conflation of sex and gender happening in other countries too, where the word gender has often been used as a polite term for sex, and then eventually it came to replace sex altogether, thereby eroding the recognition of the reality of sex and sex-based rights. German women have been speaking out against this harmful and misogynist piece of legislation, but their voices have only been ignored by the government. Instead, the government have paid attention to the co-opted women's and human rights organisations who have supported it. We see the same pattern happening here in New Zealand. Undeterred, the group Last Frauen Sprechen apologies for my pronunciation, has called for international solidarity and for us all to gather today at German embassies around the world to protest this threat to us all. Ina Wagner, the founder of Las Frauen Sprechen, said on a Women's Declaration International webinar in September, "We want the so-called gender identity to be removed from all laws because self-ID harms women's rights. They should be removed from the EU, UN and laws in all countries. Let's protest together all over the world against the arrogance and hypocrisy of misogynist politics on November the 1st, starting at 12:05. So this is exactly what we're doing. Yay! And here we are. And now I'd like to read out a message of solidarity from Ina Wagner to all of us who are here today. This is what she says. Hang on. This is her message. Dear sisters, I would like to tell you how the idea for this international campaign came about. It was born out of the anger at the politicians that I have developed in 3 years of demos against self-ID. The politicians don't hear us. Are we too quiet? Then we should unite our voices and send a call to the whole world. In this case, United Women's Voices are directed at the German politicians who have passed one of the worst self-ID laws to protect the lie that sex can be changed. But politicians in other countries around the world also act as if they don't know what a woman is and abolish women's rights. So I came up with the idea of asking women in other countries if they would demonstrate in front of the German embassies. I thought hopefully there will be 3 to 5 crazy women who will do something in 1 to 3 countries. And we made a great discovery. The world is full of crazy women. We have solidarity support from 22 countries, and in some countries, several protests have been announced. This is an example of women's power that inspires us all. We are the grassroots. We can only rely on ourselves, on women at grassroots level. Because the big organisations like UN Women, which were once supposed to protect us, women have betrayed us. They have betrayed our trust and even sold our word woman and smuggled this damn gender identity into our protective laws behind our backs. That's why grassroots women are now taking over. Women rise because self-ID harms all women and girls around the world. Dear sisters in New Zealand, we are endlessly grateful to you and are thinking of you at our rally. You are the first on the planet today, November 1st, to take this action. The spark of this women's solidarity will fly from you across the planet today and inspire women from country to country. Thank you for this incredible experience of solidarity. Ina, coordinator of Las Frauen Sprechen.
Thank you. Thanks, Janet. Awesome.
Thank you, Janet. That's wonderful. I will be speaking on behalf of Jessica, who, as I said before, is a midwife. I feel very privileged and honoured to be asked to speak today on a topic that is very dear to my heart. I am a midwife, a fierce protector of women as they move through the inner realm of the feminine, pregnancy, childbirth and motherhood. I am a space holder, a witch with innate knowledge to journey with these women. Only women can understand and experience what this means, not men. And not women who believe they are men but want to take advantage of their reproductive organs to indulge their narcissistic fantasies. I saw a statement online recently. We must normalise the pregnant man. I'll tell you what, no fucking way. If you have decided you are a man, had your breasts removed, take testosterone and live your life as a man, then why would you want to do something so intrinsically female as getting pregnant? Only women do that, and you have stated you are a man. Men do not have babies, that is a biological reality. How confused must you be? Leave us women to it. When I was very new, a young midwife about 14 years ago, I received a page on my pager from someone who I thought was a woman. Their name was one that I would associate with a woman, and when I phoned this person back, I could tell something wasn't right. The voice was older and more masculine. However, how was I to be sure? The situation the person was describing was unusual and complicated, and the only way to work out what was going on was to send them for an ultrasound. This person was claiming to be finally pregnant, in their 50s, but didn't know how far along they may be. Everything in my being told me that something wasn't right, but I needed to ensure I'd done my due diligence and provided the person with the best care. Thankfully, I had the foresight to CC their GP into the ultrasound. A few days later, I had a phone call from the ultrasound practice advising me that they had scanned my client and that there was no way the client could be pregnant as they didn't have a uterus. While they didn't confirm that they had investigated further, they suggested that the client was a man. I was initially confused, then reality kicked in when I realised what was going on and that I had been fooled. I felt embarrassed to have put the sonographer in that position and for not having listened to my inner intuition. I'm not sure what happened next, but if I phoned the GP or his GP phoned me, but I was informed that he had done this many times to many GPs and midwives as he had an obsession with getting pregnant. He had multiple scans each time, wasting taxpayers' money, health professionals' time and valuable appointments that actual biological women needed. As the health professional who ordered the ultrasound, I was legally required to inform them of the results. I had to phone this person and inform them that there was no way they could be pregnant as they didn't have a uterus and it appeared they were biologically a man. I ended up being abused by this person and told I was a terrible midwife. I was wrong, I didn't know how to do my job, and that they were going to prove to me that they were pregnant and complain to the Midwifery Council about my care. I ended up having to end the call due to the abuse, and for weeks I was worried about the repercussions from this person as they knew my name and my clinic address, which was publicly available. Were they unstable enough to turn up and find me? While I had empathy for the clear mental distress this person was in, they were nonetheless an abusive male and impacted on my life in a significant way, where I doubted my judgment and felt for my safety for a period of time. As a midwife, I observe sex at birth. If you have a penis, you are a male, and if you have a vagina, you are female. While I acknowledge that there are chromosomal deviations from the usual 6 chromosomes resulting in intersex humans, the incidence rate is about 1 in 500. I feel deeply for these people. The confusion they must experience is immense. However, most people born with a 6 chromosome abnormality still identify as one sex or the other. I would know. I was married to a man with Klinefelter syndrome, which is XXY chromosomes. While he had an extra X chromosome, he wasn't any more female, as the Y chromosome defined him as a male. While he had wider issues associated to his condition that caused the demise of our marriage, he was nonetheless a man. A shitty one, but a man. Oh, I like that energy. This brings me to my biggest concern with self-ID laws and observing sex at birth. I'm aware that there are parents who chose to bring their children up as non-binary and allowing their child to choose their gender as they develop. But what does that mean for me as a health professional? Could parents now demand that no sex be observed at birth and recorded on the legal document that I need to submit to births, deaths and marriages? There is the provision to select indeterminate on this form, but that is for ambiguous genitalia where no sex can be determined at that time and requires follow-up. Can that be ambushed now? Is this a slippery slope? Is this where gender identity and ID politics are going to be pushed into a new sphere of parents' rights and not identifying sex at birth and choosing a gender or non-gender for their child who was an innocent victim in this war? The Midwifery Council is already on that train. They were attempting to remove the words woman, wahine, mother and pepe from the scope of practice. Thankfully, the backlash was too great for them to ignore and they backed down, partway at least. They are bullying midwives into an inclusive culture that is completely exclusive of women. Who are their audience? Who do they service? Women. But they will gaslight you into believing that anyone other than woman can give birth. As a woman, and a feminist. I am ashamed. I am embarrassed to be part of a woman-dominated profession providing healthcare and midwifery to a woman that says men can do this too. This is the one thing women can do. Of all of the wonderful things humans can do in the world, only women can grow a human. Only women can birth a human. Only women can breastfeed a human. I've heard repulsive analogies before. What about women who have had hysterectomies? Are they no longer women? What about women who have cancer or go through early menopause? Are they no longer women? Are you not a critical thinker? Can you not reason with that logic yourself? Those women are still women. By their nature, they can get pregnant and reproduce. Just because there's been some abnormality in the process, or they have suffered a horrendous outcome like cancer, does not take away the fact that they are biological women. And how fucking dare you use them for your argument? I'll leave you with the powerful words of Helen Reddy when she sang, "I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore." Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. That was wonderful. I'm going to have to read my last bit because I've forgotten it. Sex self-ID affects the ease with which we claim our rights to single-sex spaces, men and women, our rights to use our own language, the rights to associate with who we want to associate with and when, the rights to exclude others from our beds. We continue to claim our rights, and we will continue to fight against an ideology that seeks to disrupt women's place in society, that seeks to destroy the lives of children, and that uses mental illness and false science to feed into an institutional ideological capture. All we've got on our side is the fact that our eyes are wide open, we know what they're doing, and we're not going to shut up. Suzanne and I would like to thank our speakers today. They embody the feminist principles, the courage and the passion that created this movement, that kept it going for this long, and that will ensure that we will win this battle. We thank you for coming and supporting. We will now hand over the baton to our Australian sisters, who will be starting round about now. We hand it over with respect, regard, in much the same way that we gave you our pavlova recipe. My apologies. I have forgotten Lou. I'm so sorry. Yes, please. We have one more speaker. Lou is here to speak from education. My apologies, Lou.
That's quite all right. I'm speaking on behalf of Resist Gender Education, but before I do... All right, I've got a loud voice, but anyway...
You'll be too close to the camera. So
Okay.
Just watch the...
Before I do that, I just want to let you know that I was part of the Decult conference. I went to the one that was held in Christchurch, and I saw some really interesting things that happened during that conference. And one of the things that I noticed, I'm just going to read you because I wrote it down and I don't want to stuff it up, because I think it's actually really important in the way that we see the trends. Cults at its core is not just about suicide and will you die for me, but the social structure of their ideology formation is not unlike the trans movement. There are clear parallels and characteristics. Shunning, for example. The support withdrawn if you disagree with them. And this has happened to a lot of detransitioners. Being lied to. Anyone can be a woman, that kind of thing. You are born in the wrong body. We all know it's bullshit. So we're from here. And I'm talking about those who are anchored in this ideology, not for people like us who we sort of maybe are curious or we understand what is going on and we're logical thinkers. But people, and not people with inquiring minds, but those people who have swallowed this bullshit, hook, line and sinker. What do we do about them? Now, it was really interesting that they talked about this in terms of cult leaders and people who were entrenched in their religious cults. What do you do with people like that? Offering education and information and even proof doesn't work. Their thinking is irrational. and it's illogical. The best thing that you can do is to ask questions. It is their thinking. It is more effective to ask in a way that implies that you know nothing and need help to understand. And this might grate against people, particularly me, who I think I'm always right anyway. So it's very hard for me to say that I'm actually, to pretend that I'm wrong. But if you come from a place of interest and concern, it provides a space for the trans-aligned to find their own loopholes and their contradictions. Okay, just let that sink in for a bit, because I think it's really important. When I've met people who go, oh, no, I'm not going to talk, they won't engage in conversation with you. But if you come from a different place, it's really interesting how much they will start thinking and being, hopefully, critical thinkers become in that way. If they're showing a leaning to that, of course, then you can provide them with some critical thought, I don't know. But anyway, and also for the detransitioners too, so that they don't slip back. Because a lot of these detransitioners, especially women who are taking testosterone, find that they want to get another hit from their testosterone and then slip back into that kind of thing. It's really important to offer a safe space for them and to provide them with a chance for them to talk and do that questioning and sit back and don't give them rhetoric and all that sort of thing. Anyway, that's just a little something that I think it's really important to share, because it was, I found the parallels absolutely fascinating when I was, at the conference. Anyway, this is from the Resist Gender Education. We are a group of concerned educators, parents and others who are resisting the infiltration of gender identity ideology into our schools. This is the ideology that believes the performance of sex stereotypes is what determines a person's sex. It has successfully persuaded politicians around the Western world to enact sex ID laws. We all know this. Germany is just the latest country to bow down to this regressive induction. The approval of sex self-ID in law has drastic consequences for children because they are being coerced and lied to by adults. Here are some of the consequences of telling children humans can change sex. For children with changed birth certificates, in the years since June 2023, 113 New Zealand minors have had their birth certificates altered. 47 of these minors were aged 15 and under. Whether these 47 school-aged children have notified their schools of the change or kept it a secret is unknown. How can teachers act in loco parentis if they don't know the physical sex of their charges? How can children's emotional well-being be secured if they don't know a fundamental truth about their peers? Are children coerced to agree? Children are being compelled to express a belief in gender identity through the threat that it is unkind or transphobic not to use a student's new preferred pronouns. It is against the New Zealand Bill of Rights for schools to impose an ideology in this way and require everyone to agree with it. And the children who lose their private spaces. Resist Gender Education categorically rejects gender identity ideology and self-sex ID. We say it is essential for schools to be objective, non-judgmental spaces and offer unbiased support for all children. We say children, love them just the way that they are. Okay, thanks.
So Lou was just saying about in the cult stuff, that it's quite good to talk to people who are in a cult, or in trans people, say, in a way that doesn't challenge them and bring them a fight, but instead gets them thinking openly and following some trains of thoughts. And so it's good to ask questions for that. I would really appreciate it if today we could share what are some good ideas, what questions could we ask? Because I did have a really good idea once and I've forgotten it. So, and it was good, but I can't remember it. So I'd really like to have hear people's ideas of what is a good, unchallenging, but a question that gets them to think.
Well, personally, I would say, I've asked the question, well, tell me what you believe. And why do you believe this? This is really interesting for me. I'm new to this, which is the bullshit, but anyway. It helps though, because it opens them up and they start to talk. Just something simple like that, and then what they produce with that will give you an idea of what the next question should be. Okay.
Thank you for that. I've been accused in the past of being the reason why we're losing this war. So just dropping the baton there with the Australians there, maybe they're right. I apologise for the muck-up. We are now ending this. We stand in solidarity with the German women and all the women around the world who are fighting this, as I said before. And the Australian woman can take over. Peace out, mate.
We're finishing this now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'm Suzanne and this is Tanya from Speak Up for Women. We're also two TERFs in a ute, which you'll find on our YouTube channel alongside this video. So thanks and good luck to everyone else around the world. Yay, sisters.
Yeah. How to you.
Yay to you.